Hi, it's Erin from Windsor Plywood. We are doing another series on our epoxy demos. So today we are going to be finishing the molds that we had broken out and sanded. So we're going to do this one here with the epoxy top, and then this one here we are going to do an oil finish on it. So we've sanded them both down. When you pour epoxy across the top, you don't have to sand it really finely. Just try and make sure it's as level as possible, and then you can just coat it with the UV epoxy from Epoxy. So we're going to mix that up and do that now, and then we will see what the actual underneath looks like. So to do this, we are going to pour just a very little. So I'm just going to use a little cup and probably not measure it out too much because one never really knows how much you need, but try and make it equal. Okay, so now that I've poured the UV epoxy, which is a 1-to-1 ratio, I'm going to stir it up and then we're going to just pour it on top. So the 1-to-1 ratio is meant for like thinner pours, and that's what you usually use to top coat things. People have done countertops, pictures, a lot of artwork is done with that because you're not pouring it for thick. The cure time is also quite a bit faster, so we have about 4 hours of working time on a piece and about a half an hour while it's just in the cup. So when I pour this, I'm going to use the Epoxy spreader, which comes with different sized teeth, just to move it around the piece and keep it level. It will self-level, so if there is a low spot, it will fill it in as long as you've mixed enough epoxy, which is always a little bit of a risk. I like to pour more, however, you also don't want to waste it. So now that this is all mixed up, we will just dump it on, and it's just going to reveal what the colors are below. And there's definitely no fancy way of doing this. The wood is raw, so it will soak into the wood, probably create a few bubbles, and with that I will use a heat gun or a torch to get them out. However, you do have to be careful that you don't overheat it and melt the epoxy. So as I move this around, you can kind of see that the wood is starting to darken, and the color of underneath the epoxy, if you remember, it is kind of an ocean beach theme, so on these cold winter days, it's quite nice to see a little bit of water movement. And so now you can kind of see that the color is coming out of the wood and of the epoxy and making it all nice and clear, which is why we didn't have to sand it to a really thick grit. So I didn't pour very much epoxy, and so it's going to make just a really, really thin coat over top of this. And I can, of course, pour another one once this is cured. I will never pour now that I've mixed. I don't ever mix more. This is what I'm stuck with, and then I would mix more once it's cured. So just using the teeth to spread it around. There's also the flat side, and you can really and when I move it, you can see how much actual epoxy there is. Kind of creates a little tidal wave, and to do the edges, you just let it flow over. But I don't want it to flow over until I get the whole main part done. And that'll just kind of make the edges also clear. You could paint it on. If I don't let it flow over that next batch, I could paint the epoxy on once it's dry, and then it'd just give it again just that thin thin coat over the top. I just love the way that the epoxy brings out the wood and it brings out the epoxy to being nice and clear. There is fine bubbles coming up here as it soaks into the wood. It's totally fine. Like I said, it's a 4-hour cure time, so it's giving us lots of time to get rid of them. I probably will do 2 final pours on top of this, so I'm not worried if there is a bubble. I can sand it out and then pour again and it'll soak in. I drip it over the edge, like I'm gonna do a little bit here, just to show you what we're working with. When you do that, you can see it creates runs like that, and that's just part of it as a liquid flows over top of an edge. So it's not always going to be a smooth unless you're constantly making it flat. So that's why I don't mind painting it with a paintbrush and just creating that really thin layer, kind of like I'm doing with my finger. Then you don't end up with as many ridges underneath, because underneath you'll have to, at the end, just sand those off. So this is going to give you what the finished product will look like, which will be quite fun. And if it looks rippled, it's because there is not quite enough epoxy, but just enough for that first really thin pour to soak in, and it'll self-level a bit. The final step in with this piece will be letting it cure, and then I will pour just a little bit more just to paintbrush the edges, and that will finish it off and it'll all look nice and crystal clear. Any lumps or bumps in the middle, I can sand them and then definitely cover it one more time. Once that's all done and cured, then the piece is finished and ready to be on display. You can come down to Windsor Plywood Grand Prairie and check it out.